Hello again, I'm Doug Smith, and welcome to the 16 June 2017 edition of Portsmouth This Week. Special guests today are Town Administrator Rich Rayner and School Superintendent Anna Riley. Welcome back to the show, folks.
Thank you.
Our topic today is something that's near and dear to your hearts, because I'm sure you've been thinking about it for the last year, and that's this year's town, or actually is next year's town budget.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if we could start, Rich, by if perhaps both of you could talk a little about the process and how we got to where we are here now.
Sure. I think Anna's process is a lot more refined than mine. I've been in the job 2 years, but essentially we bring in the department heads, we review their budget requests, we align those requests with our priorities, and the vision is laid out in the comp plan. Then we do a second round with the department heads to ensure that it's still aligned with the priorities that I have laid out with the town council earlier in the year. And then we get the school's input and we create a tentative budget from there.
Anna, is yours similar? He says yours is probably more refined, probably because it's got more years on it here.
It's got more years on it. This is my third budget in Portsmouth, but I've been a superintendent for 6 years, so I've had a little practice at this.
Yeah.
I think we have a really refined process that, like Rich mentioned, we have our strategic plan, which is our guiding document. It sets our priorities for us. And so we also meet with our department heads, our directors, and our principals. We meet individually with all of them, and members of the school committee has a finance subcommittee, so they join us for all of those meetings. We have a draft budget usually by the beginning of February, end of January, and we present the first draft to the school committee and get their input. They probably see the budget 3 times before their final vote. We have, according to charter, to submit our budget by March 25th, and we are usually wrapped up just before that and ready to submit to the town.
Okay, now Rich, typically when do you start planning? When do you start the process?
The past 2 years, we've started the process in the fall. This year, we started the process yesterday.
for the next
for
one.
next year. And the reason for that, I think that there was some frustration this year that was expressed that the budget comes out later than some people would like. It's complicated. It's a lot of numbers to go through, and there are council members and members of society that would like to have more time to review the budget. So we're going to accommodate that this year, and to do that, we're going to get ahead of the process. We've already started, and then we're going to refine the budget as it's presented right now. This budget book, this has been essentially the budget, the way the budget's been presented for the last 4 years now. But I think we can do better. So we've taken lots of notes. We've received lots of input from the council, from the school committee, from the residents, and we're going to incorporate that in next year's product. But to do that, we need to start earlier.
So it's kind of like a never-ending process, then. It just keeps going and going. And
It
going.
is. But it's an important thing to do because people understand money. People, when you're sitting at home, when you call the police show up. When you have an accident, the firemen show up. When you send your kids to school, the teachers are there. So they take that for granted. But when you got to write that tax check once a quarter, that hits people in the pocketbook literally, and it captures their attention. So you got to make sure you get it right.
Well, you guys must be getting ready to breathe a sigh of relief, because this budget is just about essentially done, right?
Absolutely.
What comes next?
Well, we've already had our first meeting. Mm-hmm. The next thing will be at the next council meeting. They will read the budget ordinance into the record, and then they will take the official vote, and then we will submit it to the state for the review.
Okay.
And then, as you say, we will all breathe a collective sigh of relief. But the pencils have already been sharpened, and
for the next one.
we'll start right in it.
I guess it's okay if you're an accountant. And by the way, how's your new finance director working out?
Yeah, John Menke is working great. He's got an excellent relationship with Chris over on the school side. So between John, Chris, Fung, and the staff over on the school, I think it's probably the best relationship that the town has seen in a number of years.
Okay. Why don't we talk about the budget itself, and maybe you want to just mention some of the highlights or lowlights, whatever you want to call them.
Real quick, it's a proposed expenditures of almost $62 million, so $61,865,000. The important thing is we had a tax rate of $16 per thousand last year of assessed value. We're proposing it to go down to $15.42 this year. We were able to do that because we just had a full reevaluation of property this year. So as property values go up, we don't have to collect as much to maintain that pie. Revenues will go up less than 2%. So total revenue is going up 1.97%. And the tax levy, even though the budget is about $62 million, but the levy, what we need to collect from people, is $52 million. And so that's a good thing. And what that does is that maintains a relatively conservative tax rate that puts us in the bottom third as far as tax rates go in all the cities and towns in Rhode Island. And when you compare, and that's the bottom third, straight listing. But if you look at that bottom third and look to see, of that bottom third, who has a professional fire department, police department, fully staffed DPW, and K through 12 school system, we're in the bottom quarter.
Yeah. So we're doing good. Keep that up. That sounds great.
Sure.
Now, Anna, after you submitted your budget to the town in March, you say, and then now do you guys work together to present this to the public? I imagine you've been through several public meetings and things.
So we are a large piece of the budget. I mean, our budget is $38 million of the 62. So clearly, folks want to hear what we're spending that money on because it is a large piece. But I think we've been hitting the goals in our strategic plan. It's a 5-year plan, all while keeping expenditures pretty low. Our total expenditures is only going up 0.26% this year. However, our town appropriation is going up 1.4%, and that's a factor of our loss of state aid. So there's a 10-year funding formula that I'm sure you've heard me talk about, and before me, someone else talked about. This was year 7. We're going into year 7. We still have 2 more years of loss coming up before it finally either flattens out or they come up with a new funding formula.
Yeah.
There are some pieces of legislation on the table right now to hold harmless the districts that are losing, because in year 7, the districts that had gained no longer gain. So they've kind of smoothed out, but there are still 3 years of losses for the districts that were losing money.
Okay,
So
but will we continue to lose as much, or will the amount go down each year?
it stays pretty flat. So
Okay.
it varies, but it's somewhere between 150 and 250. This year it's I don't even have it in front of me. 240,000, I think, is what we're going down in state aid.
Yeah, so this has got to hurt, certainly in planning. I would like to emphasize something you mentioned about strategic planning, because I think what both of you seem to be doing is paying a lot of attention to the long-term concerns. And things like infrastructure, you're putting boilers in your, new boilers in, et cetera. As a citizen, as a resident, I applaud you guys for doing that, because I think that's where we have to be.
Sure.
And I'm sure you're thinking the same way. In fact, I know you're putting money back into infrastructure. If people want to look at the budget, they can go to online to the town website and take a look at details.
Sure.
But I think it's important that we keep funding these things. They're not sexy or really fun things to watch, but they're vital, I think, to our community. So thank you for having that sort of view. In the course of your discussions with the public, have there been any consistent issues that have come up? And I mean, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of public concern so far.
I think there's some common themes that come up. Obviously, people want to keep the tax rate as low as they can, so we're working very hard to do that. As we talked about before, one of the things I do want to dispel is the
Yeah.
perception that we have an idea, a number in mind, and then we create a budget to match that number. That's not what happens. We build the budget from the bottom up and then see what the number is. We do obviously have a fair idea of what the council, what the committee would be comfortable with, and if it's too far askew, then we will keep rewickering the budget to get to something that we think people will be comfortable with while still accomplishing what needs to be done to achieve the priorities that have been laid out. As far as the town side goes, we're focused on maintaining our AAA bond rating, on improving our infrastructure, improving our roads, and replacing our fleets. When I got here, we had police cars that had 200,000 miles on them. That's not safe. So we had to come up with a plan to replace police cars. We had buildings that were falling apart. So we've renovated the Brown House. We're still putting a significant amount of money into the roads. We have upgraded our HVAC systems, and I can go on and on. But these
Yeah.
are the things that are not real sexy, but they save money and allow us to. It's a lot cheaper to maintain something than it is to replace something.
Yeah. Now, does the town have a strategic plan like the schools do? I mean, something like that, a vision for...
We have a comp plan which is very out of date. We're creating a new comp plan. The comp plan, however, does, for all the elements, the visions are laid out for all the elements. So we use that and to help us develop a capital improvement plan. We did not have an updated capital improvement plan, so we worked very hard last year to get one laid out, which will be further refined in the next budget. But we will keep that updated every year. Some people have an idea, well, it's a 5-year capital improvement plan, and then you put it on a shelf for 5 years, and then you do it again in 5 years. My background doesn't allow that. My background has taught me that you refine it and you update it every year, so it's a rolling 5 years. And I think we hit it pretty well on target, and then we'll keep working on it every
Now,
year.
is that something that the council will also see you're doing going forward? Because I think that's valuable. If you show consistency and, and the council buys in to where you're going.
Yeah, I started that 2 years ago, and I stole the idea from Anna. But lay out the priorities, and I laid them out. I laid them out to the council 2 years ago, and then I did it again this past fall, and I will continue to do that. So I get their input. Their input is what helps. Their input, what the school is working on, what my department heads need, help us craft a comprehensive capital improvement plan. And then that, outside the normal things that we have to pay for, that's what drives the budget. Contractually, we know what we have to pay in benefits. We know what we have to pay in salaries. We know what healthcare costs are going to be. So once you remove that from the equation, then you've got, the kind of beans and bullets. We know we got to buy cars. We know we have to buy trucks. We know we have to buy tires and oil. And then you got this little sliver of what's left, and that's what we're trying to use to improve things in the town.
Right. So it's going to be a very gradual process.
It's not going to happen overnight,
Moving
but
forward.
I'll say, without criticism, it took decades to get to this point.
Yeah.
So it's going to take a few years to get better.
Well, and also as a resident, I like the fact that there's a rational way of looking at this that makes sense to everybody. So keep doing what you're doing in that regard. One of the criticisms that I have heard in recent articles and things in the paper is just the idea that, personnel costs are going up. I mean, and the thing is, I'm saying, and so what? I mean, that happens.
Yeah. It's unfortunate that people only look at the microcosm and then draw that conclusion. The reality is, over the last 20 years, the number of full-time employees has probably gone up less than 10. Now, one of the things that makes it look worse is we always had billets available to be filled into police and fire, but we didn't hire to full end strength. We've done that. But we've also taken measures to reduce some of those personnel costs. Dispatchers are now civilian dispatchers, part-time, and they don't draw benefits. We do have a couple part-time employees. But they're not the big driver. You know, the Federal Reserve targets an inflation rate of 2%, greater than 2% this year, but yet salaries go up only between 1.5% and 2%. So what's driving it? And I'll steal a line from my colleague over in Newport, Joe Nicholson, when he was confronted with the same kind of question about why is everything going up higher than the rate of inflation. Well, I wish somebody would tell Blue Cross and Blue Shield that, because that's what's driving this.
Yeah.
You know, when healthcare costs are going up between 5 and 8%, there's not much I can do. We do everything we can to reduce those costs, but I only get to bite that apple once every 3 years when I'm negotiating contracts with the unions. Something changes in that interim 3 years.
Yeah.
It's a contract is a promise. You have to adhere to it. So once every 3 years, we try to negotiate with the unions to get these costs under control.
But like you say, healthcare is a serious issue that it needs reform at the national level, I think, and I'm kind of appalled at where it's going right now. But yeah, I think I can understand that. I think that makes sense, and I would assume that the critics that you've had that talk about this understand, you know, what's driving this stuff, and how there's nothing we can do individually as Portsmouth, Rhode Island, to do much about it.
I mean, there are measures. I mean, there are ideas out there. The OPEB committee had some great ideas. We've reinstituted the pension investment committee. So we do have our finger on that pulse. And the fight is never over, but we do have to be cognizant of the fact that it still takes people. When you pick up the phone, you want your street repaired. You want the policeman to show up. You want the fire truck to be there. And that's not free. And it takes people to do that. And we have been very, very conservative. This is a lean staff. Every time somebody visits me in the office, I have a question for them. How many people did you see on the way from the front door to my office? And the answer is always, well, I didn't see anybody, or I saw 1 or 2 people. That's because that's who's there.
Yeah.
That's all we have.
Yeah, it's not like we have a lot of excess people standing around doing nothing. And one of the other things that I've said all along, I'm amazed at how much volunteers do, because there are things that you need to have done that you couldn't possibly afford without raising taxes even more. Mm-hmm. You've kind of explained how you've kept the tax rate low, and certainly in this budget. One of my questions would be, do you think, is that sustainable over time, or is this kind of something you have to relook at every year and come up with?
So we started talking about yesterday.
I mean, do you see, I guess my question is, do you see any other major issues that would change that in the next year or two?
So I think Rich and I have talked a lot about that, both of us, on both the school side and the town side. We've grabbed all the low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
So the fact that we've been able to manage these kind of small increases over the last couple of years, I think, has been really excellent. But we really need to prepare folks for the fact that that will probably not be able to be sustainable over time. You know, we have personnel is over 60% of the school side of the budget, and those are contractual obligations tied to all the same things that Rich just spoke about. And so I don't know how much more we can garnish in savings. Like I said, we have you mentioned we have new boilers, so we have brought down those costs tremendously. We also have brand new LED lighting in all of our schools, so that's as low as it's going to go. And then, so we have just wrapped up our teacher negotiations, and we were able to get some savings in our health care, but we've done that now. That's not going to continue to happen. And so there aren't a lot of places where we can save those large amounts of money left. And so Rich and I have been talking about that. You know, as we roll forward, we want to be really public and really honest about the fact that this kind of low number is not going to be sustainable over time.
So you've kind of squeezed out all the excess,
Correct.
And now we're down to the bare nub of what we're going to see. And yet next year, when personnel costs go up 5%, it'll be an issue trying to figure out how to deal with that. But I think that's something everybody is dealing with, and it's a fact of life.
Communities across the country are dealing with this. The fact of the matter is, in our neck of the woods, state aid is going down, all right, but the demand isn't going down. Maybe school population is going down slightly, but there's still a demand for services. People talk about the rate of inflation, but other costs are associated with that, which are skewed outside that calculation. As I said, healthcare costs, and there's other things that are driving this. Yeah. We do make promises. We have contracts that were made years ago when times were good. Those people retired under those contracts. That's a promise that we have to maintain. Those costs aren't going down. So we have to continually look for ways to improve our operations while saving money. But as Anna said, a lot of that low-hanging fruit has been picked. So there are going to be some tough choices that we have to make.
So next year there'll be a little hardball being played up there.
Right.
How does our AAA bond rating, does that help us at all in this whole budget process?
It helps us, obviously, in the sense that if we want to bond for money, we get the lowest interest rate out there. And it is a measure of how fiscally responsible and healthy we are. But there's a double-edged sword there. When you make the case that we can't sustain the salaries that we're paying or the benefits that we're offering, it becomes very difficult to make that case when you are a fiscally responsible, healthy community and you're charging a low tax rate, when there are communities out there charging significantly higher tax rates than we are. We're not giving up that fight ever. However, people need to realize that we are a very wealthy community. So there are going to have to be things that we do in the future, out-of-the-box thinking, organizational setups. We've already started it, Anna and I. IT services consolidated between the school and the town. Maintenance, facilities maintenance consolidated between the school and the town. Human resources consolidated. So we're doing our part, and healthy criticism is always good. Nobody is going into the budget process hoping to raise taxes. That's not the way we operate. But the fact of the matter is, we're probably looking at a tough year next year, a tough budget.
And as you say, our per capita income is relatively high in Rhode Island, so it's not like we can't afford things. What about our pension fund liabilities? I mean, how are we doing with that? That's always an issue in every town these days.
Yeah. You'll hear people say that our unfunded liability is in critical status, which by the letter of the law is true. That's because we are using an assumed rate of return that is lower than what the state uses, and that put us in what's called a critical status, because you're critical if your pension fund is lower than 5 or 60%. We've had a very good year. It's probably on the order between 58 and 59% funded right now. But what we have and what we're doing that a lot of communities can't afford to do is we are funding that annual required contribution to our pension fund at 100%. And we have a plan. We have, before I got here, there was a 30-year plan laid out. It's approved by the state. We are in year 7, so we will pay that entire liability down in 30 years. So we have 22 years to go. Yeah. That said, we also did something else that is noteworthy. We had pension reform where all new hires are now on a 401 system. So when you retire, I don't have a pension liability anymore. Yeah. You have what you've been able to save up in your 401. So this is an alligator that's going to work its way through a python. So I'm not worried about the pensions, and in that sense, we have to remain vigilant and not give away the farm in contract negotiations. The next barbarian at the gate is OPEB, and that's other post-employment benefits, and we're talking healthcare, and that's what we just
is that the same for the schools? Are we talking schools and
So
town?
ours are much smaller only because our teachers are all in the state pension system.
Okay.
So that doesn't fall on the town. So for us, it's just our uncertified staff, all our custodians and maintenance, our clerical staff, and
Okay.
our teaching assistants.
Now,
So-
are you guys then in better shape or worse shape?
Well, our
regarding-
number is much smaller compared to
Okay.
it's the one
Yeah.
side where our number is
It's-
smaller.
It's
Much fewer staff.
the school, our clerks, and our DPW are all in very good shape because they work to a point where, let's say they work till they're 60, they're only going to draw those benefits for about 5 years because we transition everybody to Medicare at 65.
Yeah.
We have police and fire, though, they tend to retire in their 40s because they have contracts that allow them to retire after 20 years of service. We're working on that. You know, if somebody retires at 20 years service, they draw medical benefits for 25 years, longer than they worked for the town.
Yeah.
And we have to, but those were promises that were made in the past. And as I've explained to many people, you keep chipping away at that. We keep chipping away at that every contract. But we did make promises to people.
Yeah.
And we have contracts where people's names are laid out. So my hands are tied.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to go back to somebody who's been named in a contract and promised a benefit
And
and say, I'm
absolutely
going to take it away.
understandable. I know exactly what you're talking about. I think we have to honor things like that or we're going to be nowhere. What about our rainy day fund, our so-called rainy day fund? I guess that's for emergencies?
Yeah, our fund balance, we have a policy that is about 16% of our general fund, and it's right now we're at about 12%. We're extremely healthy.
Okay. So we're doing well on that. We're doing relatively well, and we have a plan, which I think is a great thing. Again, I applaud you guys for thinking long term for the pension issue. Are there any other key things we need to think about going forward? Healthcare will always be an issue until it gets resolved by somewhere bigger than us, I think.
Yeah.
What kind of takeaways should people take away from this program and from a quick look at the budget?
From my perspective, I would tip my hat off to the schools. I think that we have two finance departments that are working extremely well together. Anna and I think, are very much in sync with what our priorities are and what we need to do to remain fiscally conservative.
Yeah. I mean, we do. We share the same goals. We want Portsmouth to be the best town to live in Rhode Island. We want the best school system and everything else to measure up accordingly. And that takes work and it takes money, but I think that we're very focused on those goals. I mean, student achievement, student safety is our highest priority, and what works really well for Rich and I and the rest of our town departments is we all agree on those priorities. What is it that we have to do to work together to make those things happen simultaneously, which makes it a great partnership.
Yeah, and I echo your thoughts. I think we need to get the very best we can out of everything here in Portsmouth. We're doing well. Thanks in large part to you folks. Thanks for your efforts in putting all this stuff together.
Sure.
It goes way beyond me, but very interesting. Thanks so much for coming on the show, and
Thanks,
Thank
Doug.
you.
thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.